Hello, my name is Andrew Shikiar. I'm the Executive Director and Chief Marketing Officer at FIDO Alliance. It's great to be here speaking at the DID Alliance Korea Conference on FIDO Alliance and the future of authentication. As we know, authentication is not easy. Passwords are a problem. All of us can relate to this as consumers. They're hard to manage, they're hard to remember, they're hard to enter on small devices. As IT managers or business owners, you understand the risk associated with depending on having your employees use passwords to log in. And as merchants, you may relate to the challenge of asking customers to enter a password or authenticate themselves, adding too much friction to the process in making a purchase. As a result, you see statistics like you see here. And frankly, you could have dozens of slides that look just like this that talk about the challenges that passwords present to every segment of the marketplace. When I look at these, statistics, though, I look at really what are the symptoms and the causes of the mission of FIDO Alliance, which is the data breach problem. And FIDO's mission, since we were launched, is to tackle the data breach problem and work to eradicate data breaches. The tip of the spear of that is fixing authentication, because the fact of the matter is weak credentials, such as passwords, cause the vast majority of data breaches. And so that's why FIDO has focused very closely on creating better solutions for user authentication. Additionally, it's important to note that in addition to passwords being difficult to manage, there's a cycle of credential theft that continues to grow and is self-perpetuating. Data breaches don't just have one-time damage. In fact, it's the carry-on damage that's even more impactful. Credentials that are stolen through data breach end up on the dark web. They're purchased by hackers for very affordable prices. They're then set up using botnets and other things to systematically try to stuff logins on all sorts of commerce and banking websites around the world. In fact, one study shows that up to 90% of attempted logins on e-commerce sites are spoofed logins or stuffed logins. What's even more scary is that around 2% of those can be successful. And so that's how you get data such as what we show here. In the US alone, there's an annual cost to businesses of over $5 billion per year. What's even more damaging, though, is that this, as I said before, it's a self-perpetuating cycle. So some of these credentials that I can steal or a hacker can steal, you can use to spearfish and phish employees at other enterprises, which allows you to then break into those systems and get even more credentials and put those in the dark web, and that's how this whole thing starts to cycle out of control. So this is another impact of weak authentication practices that are dependent on these shared secret credentials, which we'll talk about a little bit further in a moment. But how did we get here? Why is this model so broken? Why are these credentials out there in the dark web in the first place? The fact of the matter is that the landscape that FIDO inherited when we launched in 2013, we're looking at two traditional forms of authentication. First, as you see here, is passwords. Passwords, as we know, have very weak security, but they also have pretty poor usability, right? So an easy password is easy to use, but a more complex password or remembering different passwords for every site becomes very complex. Also, entering passwords on small devices or, say, smart TV, things without an interface, are present very poor user experiences. And security is very weak. Now, traditionally, multi-factor authentication has been around for a while. It's certainly much better than a password alone, but it also has its own usability challenges. After all, what's worse than one password? Two passwords, or the need to juggle between devices, say entering an OTP code from a dedicated token onto your PC, or juggling between apps. That user experience is very poor. And while security is certainly better than a password alone, it's still a secret that can be spoofed. In fact, more and more phishing attempts are targeted at man-in-the-middle attacks and relay attacks where someone's being spoofed out of presenting their second-factor credentials, whether it's an SMS OTP, a TOTP, or something else. As long as it's a server-side credential, it can and will be manipulated and can and will be stolen. So that's why the model's so broken, right? It's a dependence on server-side credentialing, server-side authentication, and that's what we need to fix. So FIDO was launched in 2012, formally opened in 2013 to solve this problem, to solve the shared secret problem, to solve the password problem. What you see here on this screen, these are the companies that are leading FIDO's board of directors. I'd like to look at this list of very impressive companies by asking myself the question, who needs to sit around the table together to solve the password problem? And it really will look a lot like this group of companies. You have three kind of core cohorts, if you will. First, you have the platform providers and device manufacturers that are creating the devices that we use every day. So the operating systems from Microsoft, Apple, and Google, devices from Samsung, chips from Intel. And that's a very important part of the alliance, who are mass producing devices that will be used for authentication. Secondly, you have specialists in identity and security and biometrics who are either bringing years of experience in the group of someone like RSA, or you have more upstart innovative companies earlier stage who are bringing new methodologies into the alliance, such as Knock Knock or Rayon Secure, who are kind of pushing that part of the alliance. And then last but not least, we have the service providers, companies whose businesses are utterly dependent on their ability to deliver high assurance services to billions of users worldwide on a daily basis. So payment networks and banks like BC Card and Bank of America, Visa, MasterCard, American Express, the social media companies, e-commerce merchants like Amazon. They're the ones bringing use cases in, and then the rest of the alliance works together to build the technical underpinnings, specifications, and the ecosystem that will allow us to collectively move beyond passwords. And that's just the board of directors. Other parts of FIDO, we have sponsor members. These are companies that are deeply involved, deeply invested in FIDO, working inside the working groups to build the specifications and the best practice outputs that we create. We have associate members who are helping kind of build out the FIDO certified ecosystem with products and services that are compatible with FIDO specifications. And then we have liaison partners who are other standards bodies and .orgs that help us extend the reach to adjacent use cases and new markets. So that's who's driving FIDO. What are we doing? We're aiming to provide simpler, stronger authentication. We're fundamentally moving the market from a means of authentication that's dependent on server-side shared secrets to one that allows users to authenticate locally to devices that they use every day, that are in their fingertips, that is on top of asymmetric public key cryptography. So it's single gesture, so single movement, possession-based in your hand authentication. Simpler, stronger authentication, replacing the old, riskier model of server-side shared secrets. Briefly, how does FIDO work? Let's look at this. The key thing that FIDO is introducing here is a concept called the FIDO Authenticator. Traditionally, before the authenticator, a user would authenticate directly to a server. What sits on the server is a shared secret. It's machine readable. Anyone can steal it, anyone can use it, but so long as that user matches the password, they can access services. As we've already talked about, that's a very high risk, unsustainable, not fit for purpose approach to user authentication. The authenticator intermediates this dialogue, if you will, and the authenticator is both a concept and specifications, and it's a physical thing. What's unique about the authenticator is that is where the private key is stored. Right? So when I enroll my FIDO account, when I establish my FIDO credentials, a unique key pair is created. A public key sits on the server, as you see in this diagram, and a private key sits on my device. Unlike a password, the public key has no material value. Right? So even if someone steals it or takes it, they can't reuse it. There's no value to that. It can't be resold and stuffed or anything like that. The private key is very valuable. That stays on my device. Right? So the private key never leaves my device, and I need to interact with my device through some means of user verification for the private key to essentially be activated, if you will. User verification, again, this is a single gesture, local to that device, so whether it's a biometric or a PIN or touching a security key, just proving presence, that's what allows the private key to then interact with the public key through this challenge response mechanism, which completes the authentication ceremony. Very important to note is that in this dialogue between the private key and public key is embedded a fair amount of metadata and information that binds the keys together as information, say, about the server, the domain of the server for the app or the service that is uniquely read by the private key and vice versa. Additionally, in this metadata exchange are attributes about the authenticator. So for certain use cases, a service provider may wish to have a higher level of security for the authenticator, which would you certify for. You can specify that as a requirement and read that during this authentication process. So at a very high level, that's how FIDO works from a technical standpoint. Again, we're taking the password away and replacing it with the public key. From a user experience standpoint, I want to emphasize this again, FIDO is simpler. All right, so you use what's on your device or something you carry with you for a better overall user experience. All right, so it's very important that FIDO is being embedded in devices we use every day, whether it's an Android handset, a Windows PC, a security key, which is more of a prosumer or enterprise type thing. But these are all devices, and very simple devices that people are used to interacting with on a daily basis. So that's been FIDO's vision since day one. FIDO, as I mentioned, opened for new members in 2013, and shortly thereafter, we got to work on two initial sets of specifications. One was for a second factor use case, FIDO U2F, whereby you are supplementing a password with a secure device, a security key, as you see in this picture here. So these are very popularized by companies like Yubico, but there's many more in market from vendors like Phaeton or TrustKey or EWBM. But this is a second factor device where you're proving a possession of the device rather than doing like an SMS OTP. So it's possession-based local authentication, which has proven to be unphishable. The other use case we worked on was a password replacement using biometrics. This is FIDO UAF. This was innovated by Knock Knock Labs and brought to market with PayPal and Samsung initially, where basically you are replacing the password with a biometric. So the user experience is the same as it would be with a native device API. So just like one unlocks their phone, they're now able to log in using their biometric. The difference is this allows companies to get rid of the password. Right? So instead of having passwords on the device and just basically copying and pasting them and sending them over the wire, on the server side, there's no dependence on a password whatsoever. So that's a big difference. While the user experience is the same, it's far more secure. So both these specifications saw a strong initial uptake. You see the logos here. These are companies that served as early adopters, had great success with FIDO. But we realized that to truly gain scale, we had to target the web itself and target devices and platforms as a means of getting FIDO out there. And that's where FIDO 2 came into play. So FIDO 2 had two components. There's an extension of the U2F paradigm called CTAP, which extends the device's authenticator concept. And there's a piece called WebAuthn or Web Authentication, which was developed in W3C, which basically brings FIDO authentication to the web. What we've seen is that FIDO 2 has been rapidly adopted, which has really driven growth of the addressable user base. So any Android 7 or later handset supports FIDO 2. Any Windows 10 machine has Windows Hello, also supports FIDO 2. And through the work with W3C and with WebAuthn, we've seen every major browser now support FIDO and support WebAuthn and FIDO 2. So all in, we have a massively addressable user base that allows for cross-platform deployment capabilities. So again, you have the platform support, you have the web support. If you wish to do native apps, you can do native iPhone apps or Android apps using the FIDO UAF platform. The key thing to understand is that there's support across all these environments for companies that wish to deploy FIDO authentication. In fact, you can match any use case to the FIDO specifications. And we've seen strong validation in the marketplace. So this is a small sampling of companies that are using FIDO in Korea. Of course, you'll know that just about every bank, insurance company, MNO, you name it, it's using FIDO. So Korea is very much a hub of FIDO innovation and FIDO deployments. Globally, this is more representative of the type of companies that are using FIDO in other parts of the world. But you'll see this spans banking, commerce, government, enterprise, really, we're seeing broad adoption in all sectors, in all segments. Another thing to emphasize that we have a certification program, very important. Certification really, in my view, makes the ecosystem tick. I like to say that certification, conformance without certification testing is like one hand clapping. You need to know that products conform to specifications, but also can interoperate with each other. And that's what we do with our functional certification. We test for all of our core protocols. Additionally, I mentioned briefly before that we have security certification levels for FIDO authenticators, which again can be keys, it can be devices. This answers the question, how well do you protect the private key? Right, so L1, protects against scalable phishing attacks. I've gone through some vendor questionnaires. L2 prevents against malware attacks or software attacks. Then L3 prevents against hardware attacks. And the latter two are complemented by the biometric component certification program. This is the last certification program we have that I want to mention, is a program we created for the industry to allow companies to test the efficacy of individual biometric components. So we test for false accept rate, false reject rate, presentation attack detection or spoof detection. The first handset that was FIDO certified was actually the Galaxy S10 devices. So those were FIDO biometric certified, and we've seen many more companies since then move forward with the biometric certification program. So hopefully that gives you some background on FIDO and kind of where we stand today. Again, we have robust specifications. We have a massively addressable marketplace of devices. You can target any user pretty much anywhere now for FIDO authentication, and we're very focused on driving adoption of these specifications. So let's talk a little bit about FIDO futures and where we're going moving forward. And a lot, some of this has to do with the theme of adoption, such as this. So one thing we've been told from service providers is that it would be helpful to provide a common login experience to consumers. And as part of that, we've introduced consumer marks that relying parties or service providers can use at point of login. So on the left, you see the I in FIDO. That's what we call the I mark. Any company that's deploying a FIDO certified server can use this mark. And it can be incorporated into a login with FIDO button, for example, or you could say things like powered by FIDO or secured by FIDO. And you see this little image there of a small website. We've created a website that you can point consumers to that explains how FIDO works. So it's consumer language, none of the jargon that I use on a daily basis. It's meant for the average consumer to read, to learn about FIDO authentication. Another key thing that we've realized is that there are gaps in adjacent areas that need to be filled for FIDO's mission to be realized. Right? So FIDO is proven to be unphishable user authentication, but that doesn't stop someone from taking advantage of social engineering or other processes to try to do an account takeover through an account recovery process. In fact, the biggest question we get about FIDO is, how do I recover my FIDO authenticator? Many companies are resorting currently to re-enrolling users. And the problem with that is that when you enroll users, too often it's dependent on an outdated mechanism of identity verification, such as knowledge-based authentication, which has been proven to be ineffective because either the customers don't know the answers or the answers are out there in the dark web. So we're going to solve that through a new working group on identity verification. Separately, IoT is well known for security issues, and we're working to take the password out of IoT for secure device onboarding. And this here shows where these areas fit into FIDO's scope, moving beyond authentication, looking to strengthen identity verification to support a better account recovery, and also to, again, focus on IoT through secure device onboarding. So these are new initiatives we have inside of FIDO. In summary, FIDO is the present and the future of user authentication. It presents stronger, faster, better means of authentication. It fits use cases. It's been based upon tens of thousands of hours of IP contributed into the specification. So it's a very robust answer to the industry's password problem. One last note: we have a public conference called Authenticate. This is being held November 9th through 20th. It's free to attend. It's online. I'd encourage you to attend to see some case studies, get deeper on the FIDO technology, and to learn more about how you can bring FIDO into your solutions today. So thank you very much. I appreciate your attention today.